Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 250. What goes into making video courses at Real Python? How should you build an installable Django application? Christopher Trudeau is back on the show this week, and we're recording from DjangoCon Europe 2025. This week, the Real Python Podcast is experiencing several firsts. We recorded a show in front of a live audience for the first time, and neither of us had been to Dublin, Ireland. I also met Christopher Trudeau in person for the first time. This week, we're sharing our live recording from the conference. We also share how we create video courses at Real Python. Christopher digs into his tutorial on how to write an installable Django application. And we also share a few summaries of the talks from the conference and projects from the Django community, including a news roundup, how decisions are made inside the Django Foundation, ways you can help with reviews, using the Django ORM with Marimo notebooks, maintaining a data-oriented project, how to get foreign keys horribly wrong, a project for simple deployment, and another project for adding extra buttons inside the Django admin. We want to thank several audience members who live in Ireland and heard about DjangoCon from listening to the podcast. Thank you for attending the conference and saying hello. And thanks also to those who asked us insightful questions at the show's end. We enjoyed exploring Dublin and recording the show in front of a welcoming audience. We learned a ton from all the great talks given at the conference and made some connections for future interviews. This episode is sponsored by AMD. AMD invites you to create AI innovations without barriers and scale your projects with resilience. Whether you're developing LLMs, building models, or optimizing PyTorch pipelines, AMD empowers you to do it all, openly and without limits. Follow AI at AMD on X for exclusive updates and resources. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Welcome to the Real Python Podcast, live from DjangoCon EU. So very excited to be here in Dublin, Ireland with my co-host. This is the first time we've actually met in person. So after 3 years, 75 episodes, Mr. Trudeau is here with me. And it's been fun. It's been a really fun trip so far, a really great conference. Enjoying it. We have quite a full room. I was not expecting that, so I feel very humbled. My face is very red, which you might see on some video at some point. As usual, we got news. We got a couple topics. Actually a couple very real Python-y kind of topics this week, which will be interesting. Then we are going to talk a little bit about the conference and some of the stuff that we saw. It's a very Django-focused show. And we have our projects as usual, which I think all should be pretty interesting. And they're actually kind of related to some of the talks in my case. And we're going to do a little audience Q&A, which is a very brand new thing for us here. So you ready to start, Christopher?
Yeah, it was good to finally meet you in person. And I had a bet that you were a bot and I lost. So there you go. We'll get started with the news. First off, we've got PEP 770. This is called Improving Measurability of Python Packages with Software Bill of Materials. This got accepted. They could have had a shorter title, but it got accepted. This PEP is about metadata describing releases for use by external tools. Since this is a standard, it isn't targeted to any particular release. Second, PEP 736, shorthand syntax for keyword arguments at invocation, got rejected. This PEP proposed a shortcut for keyword arguments when the name of the argument and the name of the variable being passed in were the same. For example, first name equals first name, which you see all the time in function calls. The steering committee felt that the extra maintenance effort to implement the feature didn't warrant the benefit, so it isn't going to be done. And third, is PEP 661, Sentinel Values. This got deferred. This PEP is about introducing another kind of nothing holder in addition to none. There are some cases where none is meaningful, like when you're dealing with nulls in a database, and having another kind of nothing might be beneficial. The steering committee hasn't really said much about what they want to do with this, just that they might reconsider it for Python 3.15. There's a long discussion on this topic on the Discord server if you wanted to get a sense about what all this is about.
All about nothing.
Yes, all about nothing. Several kinds of nothing. And then the last bit of news is a release announcement. Pydantic 2.11 has come out. This version mostly concentrates on performance improvements with faster schema build times and better memory usage. For our Django audience, Pydantic is what underlies Ninja, so this actually might benefit those of us who are using that API.
All right, thanks. So we're going to start at my first topic is to talk all about my other job at RealPython. This is actually where I started at RealPython. I answered a call for submissions for people that want to do video content. And so I started creating courses. And pretty quickly, Dan really liked my courses. He would say things like, I'd ask a question like, how should we divide up things into different sections and so forth? I already had thought of a plan. And he would then say in the Slack channel, if you want to know how to divide courses up into different sections, just look at how Christopher Bailey's doing it. And I was like, okay, but you didn't answer my question. So that's been kind of the way things roll. And since then, I've been kind of become the de facto reviewer of all the content and basically involved with a team of people, which I'm going to introduce as we kind of go through it. So if you aren't familiar with the video courses here on RealPython, we usually base them upon articles. So they are the written articles, and we end up kind of going through another pass of the person will outline them and kind of decide, what's going to be in there. We have a whole Trello sort of system of cards. If you've ever done sort of publishing before, you might be familiar with that idea of moving things across, or I guess project management also. We typically gear them toward the more popular articles. If we can, the stuff that's going to be typically viewed more often on the site, we'll sort of queue as this is more important. Occasionally, we'll get unusual requests. Sometimes Mr. Trudeau will say, hey, I want to make a course about Ninja, which we didn't have an article on. And so we'll do something like that. One of the new things we're doing is kind of a code conversation thing that's brand new for us, where it's a bit of pair programming, almost a bit more of a conversation to kind of show stuff off. And we're doing some experiments, and actually we'd love feedback on that if you guys have any for us, what you think of it. So that's kind of going behind the idea of creating stuff from scratch. Typically, a 30-minute course for the instructor to record them takes about 15 to 20 hours. We have had courses that are 2 hours or an hour or so, and you can kind of just extrapolate the amount of time there. As far as building decks, we have a markdown tool called Marpit that we're using that kind of gives us the themes, which kind of speeds up review and revisions and things like that, which is nice. There are people that like to use other tools like Keynote, this guy. Often then we'll be showing sample code and then recording screencasts. Depending on who the video instructor is, if they are comfortable with doing video editing, they might do a pass and try to crop things out or adjust stuff and kind of go from there and do their own sort of first pass of edit. Along with that, there's multiple stages of review. I would, as a reviewer, review their slides, what they're going to cover. Very often, you might have seen some of our, I don't know what to call them at that point. They become almost like a novel of an article, massive sort of tutorials. What I've chosen to do often is to say, like Ger Arne is somebody who I've done a handful of different things of his material, and like his decorators tutorial is massive. It's fantastic, but at a certain point, I think we can kind of move beyond what can be shown really well as video and then maybe switch into, hey, to continue practicing, let's go back to the written stuff. And so we often will say, all right, maybe not cover every single item in there. So that's kind of a choice in the review process. Along with the reviewing, we have to figure out, okay, what happens as far as the setup that they're using as far as recording. Mr. Trudeau has a very specific setup that he likes to use. He's using Keynote, like I said, again. He's recording using OBS. I mentioned the different microphones and stuff that we use. He likes to use a tool to, instead of live typing, he's developed a little tool called Purdy, which is a library you can get on IPI. And it is a tool that can actually type out things for you. So if you're a person that wants to do presentations and not have to do a live type and worry about actually making spelling mistakes and stuff like that. My setup, when I was doing more recording, Mac OS, and then I was using Marpit, which is the tool that we use for Markdown. I was previously using Keynote also. And then I'm primarily working inside VS Code, and I simply just use the QuickTime recorder, which actually works really well. And from there, the instructor will submit stuff to me. I'll do a first pass review. And from there, if that passes and there aren't updates that need to be done, typically the updates, if I'm looking at the first stuff, it might be just simply, we got to make sure their audio stuff is good enough and make sure that, they're recording, they understand the setup. Suggestions on microphones. I know probably the most popular microphone in the world right now, as far as people that get into podcasting, is the Blue Yeti microphone. Please don't buy that microphone. It is absolutely horrible to try to fix the audio from, because it records more of the room than it does the person. And I really am not a fan. If you can get a stick mic, a dynamic mic, and you can stick it in somebody's face close to them, maybe put a pop stopper on it, that's going to give you the best kind of audio. If you ever want to talk about audio, please hit me up. As was mentioned, I was an audio engineer for a while. So we have our own editor internally. So at that point, if we get through that process, I pass it off to Mr. Tappan, who I'm going to show here in a second, our video editor. And his job is to, depending on how much the person does pre-editing, he will actually be often tying chunks together, or the fixes that somebody submitted, or maybe they've re-recorded some of the audio. He'll levelize the audio. He'll remove any background noise if that's an issue. He also does things, if you're familiar with video editing, like J-cuts. So if somebody is doing the typing along and they're not speaking, he'll have to edit it so that he'll cut it so that the audio is now underneath them typing, as opposed to them doing it at the same time. Plays around with pacing, so he might speed up typing and so forth. Highlighting and zooms are new things that we're getting into a lot better. He was a big Premiere guy as far as video editing, if you guys are into that stuff at all. He is all about DaVinci Resolve. It's right there in front of me. Okay, great. On the Mac platform, for whatever reason, they've added this nice thing that indicates, hey, your screen's being recorded. Well, that little dot is on every recording then, so he has to go ahead and remove it. So typically, it might take between 5 to 6 hours for editing there. The tools that we use for audio, and this is a set of tools that I actually use for the podcast also, depending on where my guest is and the kind of setup they have, and if they got a Blue Yeti microphone, I might have to be using this Isotope set of plugins, which is fantastic. It has tools for removing the reverb from the room, background noise. It can do noise prints to remove that sort of stuff. Removes
mouth sounds, which is my problem.
Mouth clicks is literally the name of the plugin. D-mouth click. I love it. It works great. So yeah, we are a Django shop. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. Real Python is entirely run on Django, and there are a whole bunch of apps there. And it is hosted on Heroku. And one wrinkle in that is that we don't host the videos ourselves. We work with Vimeo. They do the hosting. Don't try to go look for them there. You won't see any of our stuff on Vimeo. They're basically set up private and are only attained basically through going through our site. It's a pretty complex setup compared to a written tutorial. If you were inside our admin, it's pretty advanced. There's not only the course main page, but there's sections, all the individual lessons, and then the components. We have downloadable resources. So we have sample code and slides. Something that was a fairly early wrinkle was us adding transcripts, and then along with that, contributors. I'll talk about transcripts a little bit more. Again, we also will add lots of links to other resources and potentially a quiz. So after that setup happens, we move it into a transcripts phase, and we do two things there. The first pass actually just generates, it's very much just a voice-to-text system, and creates a VTT file, which gives the time codes for the closed captions. And then the second pass is something that we've added recently that used to be entirely manual, which was to try to identify code stuff inside there, to add the symbols, to figure out what are keywords and so forth. So all that kind of highlighting happens. We've moved from being entirely manual. We've added a second sort of LLM type solution. It requires still human review and manual updating. Sometimes it goes sideways. Sometimes it'll eat time codes. Sometimes somebody has a lot of words in their course in their particular lesson. and the context window gets eclipsed. And so that can be very messy and manual, but at least it's rare. It's becoming better. Again, context windows get bigger all the time, right? So then we do a final CMS setup and review of the transcripts. So the goal is to do one new video course per week. So in order for me to travel, I had to create a little bit of a backlog. So luckily I have a few things here set up that are coming out. And then it's a whole other separate process. I'm pretty much the chief of that. And along with that, we're always looking for contributors. So if you have ever made video courses and you're interested in doing that, you can reach out. You might have seen us reach out before in the past, but if you're interested, we're always looking for new video content people. We've had some changes over the years. I really enjoy doing it. That, again, my background of being in audio and video, it was a perfect fit. And I was a teacher for like 10 years. And so it was kind of a nice mix of stuff. So that's that. Here's some of the people that are involved. Brenda is our editor-in-chief, sort of. She reviews not only all the tutorials that you read on Real Python, but she also helps me with the transcripts and some of the other language review stuff. If you've ever enjoyed the artwork across Real Python sites, that's Aldrin Santos. He's got a really great signature style, which we really enjoy there. Philip Ixeni and Martin Broyce are two of the people that are more involved in helping if you were to come on board with this, that they help with onboarding and getting people set up. They also act as reviewers often and do some courses from time to time. You might have seen their names. And then Bartosz Jaczynski, he's also occasional reviewer and instructor for us also. So I'm going to pass it on. I don't know if you have questions or stuff you want to comment.
Just sort of all told with all that, like by the time you're done, the thing I think always seems to surprise people is you're looking at over an hour per minute of content by the time you've put it all together, right? So when you're going through and watching something, the difference between I'm recording coding on YouTube and there's no video or whatever, and it's just a sort of a streamcast versus the kind of content that we have, that there's a lot of work behind the scenes that goes into that, and a lot of people touch it. So
a lot of work,
yeah. So and one of the things we kind of wanted to do today, we putting the photos up of some of the other people there, is like, you'll hear his name, you'll hear my name, but there's a small army behind us as well that gets the stuff out there. So.
What does the evolving intersection of AI and OpenStack mean for developers? AMD knows innovation starts with developers and grows through partnership, sharing, dialogue, and ingenuity. AMD invites you to experience its open community, made by developers for developers. Follow AI at AMD on X for valuable Developer Central resources. That's AIATAMD on X.
All right, we going on? We moving on. All right.
So what's your topic here?
So my article this week is one of my own. So there's nothing like being a raving egomaniac in front of a room full of people. So the article is called How to Write an Installable Django App. It was actually an older article, but it got refreshed recently, updating it for Django 5. And in addition to doing that, in addition to doing sort of newer versions of Django, I also changed the testing mechanism to Nox, because Tox bugs me, and I'm a complete convert now. And I modernized the packaging spec, so PyProject TOML and all that kind of good stuff. Django has module-like components that can be reusable. Typically, you use these inside of a project to organize your code, and for historical reasons, these are called apps. This is a little confusing nowadays, but that's the way it is. You can extract these apps as independent installable components, and almost all the third-party libraries for Django out there are essentially these kinds of things. To show you how this works, the article starts with a full project, which includes a receipts app. And inside that app, you have models.py and admin.py files, the typical stuff for a Django app. And just like in the real world, you add tests to the project. You're adding tests to your projects, right? Right? So once you've got the project working, the next step is to extract the app into its own thing. An installable app is similar to any other Python package. Best practice is to put the code in a source directory, have a PyProject TOML file, and tests to go with it. And then you use, build and twine or whatever your favorite build system is, like any other PyPI project. Although the module structure is the same as any other installable thing, there are a few additional steps you have to take. Behind the scenes, a Django project does some initialization based on your project's configuration. You can do this process manually if you know the right functions to call. I typically put this little initialization code in a function called boot Django inside of a utility file. And there's two parts to this. The first is settings.configure. The arguments to that call are key value pairs that are the same kinds of key value pairs that you would put in settings.py. This can't be empty. There are some that Django requires to be defined. Exactly what is required has changed over time. If you don't get it right, it'll scream at you. So you just go, oh, that's missing, and go put it back in. But the article, of course, goes into the details as to which ones you need for Django 5. Once you've got the configuration set up, then you call django.setup, and that is what allows you to actually sort of use this app as if it was inside of a Django project. For all this to work, Django has to be able to find your app, which typically means you need to add the app's module directory to the Python path with a syspath insert call. So that's the quick version. The article goes on to talk about how to deal with test discovery, publishing, how to use Nox to test across versions, Python and Django, and all that kind of good stuff. Since I'm on the topic, how about a little bit of shameless self-promotion? I maintain a catch-all library filled with crap that I got tired of rewriting called Django All. It's a whole mishmash of stuff. The thing I use most from it is a set of utilities to help write Django admin commands, one of which is going to get deprecated because we now have underscore support in 5.2. The reason I bring this up, besides my aforementioned egotism, is the most recently added feature. It now comes with a script called make manage. When you run make manage, it creates a localized version of manage.py inside of your installable app directory. So all that boot Django stuff that I just talked about is available as a function, which the local copy of manage.py uses. And then you can call that in order to run any of the usual Django commands as if you were in a project. So say your tests, we're back to that. So we'll link to this in the show notes.
It's a big circle.
Yes. We'll link to this in the show notes. Bug reports and PRs are welcome. So,
all right. That was it.
Yeah, we're there.
Okay. It's spelled Django All.
As in
A-W-L.
small, sharp thing that you stick in your hand and bleed. Yes. Wood. That's its purpose. That's
leather
right.
working.
Right.
Or whatever. All right. Nice. So we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's happening here at DjangoCon EU. So again, this is a little bit of a redundant for the people in the room, depending on if they've been to all the workshops and all the talks. But so we're going to hit some of them. There are some themes happening here. So I'll start. I actually wanted to do a quick shout out to Sam. I don't know if Sam's in the room. I ran into the other, hey, there he is, yeah. And Sam is from here. He's from Ireland. And he heard about the event, about us talking about it on the show. So that's great. So he came to DjangoCon.
Oh, and we got a couple other hands in the audience. There we go. Look at that.
Oh, we got a couple more? Oh, fantastic.
People listen. That's nice.
Yeah, it's great. It's so funny, putting stuff out on the internet. You have no idea. You download numbers, but you're unsure. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the talks. And I actually want to start with Sarah Boyces, she's in the room here. And she is one of the 1.5 Django fellows, as she says, paid maintainer of the project. She did an opening talk, and the talk was called Django Needs You to do code review. And a lot of it was about this mountain of PRs, and we need people to basically in the Django community to help with, not only reviewing them, but kind of there's just not enough reviewers to kind of keep up with what's happening there. This will be a bit of a theme. There was interesting stuff talking about what's involved as far as getting things eventually merged into core and who has kind of the rights to that, and the bit of the bottleneck there. There's a bit of a backlog, almost about a year, and that's something that they're working on. Anyway, I've asked Sarah to come on the show, so we'll see if she can come on the show later. We could kind of discuss the topic further, so I'm excited about that. Kind of continuing on that theme, Carlton Gibson had also just a quick shout out. If you haven't listened to Django Chat, if you're podcast listeners in the room here, it's a great show. He does with William Vincent. He had a talk called How We Make Decisions in Django. And there's so many people that are using Django but there's only this small percentage of people that are the engaged users, which I thought was really interesting, usually this 0.1%. And I think about that, like most people are using this platform and maybe not so much engaged with the day-to-day and involved in the project, maybe because of the stability of this project. And so there's this long conversation, and again, you'll be able to watch these talks later, but the idea of keeping the core has always been this concern, but maybe there are some ways to move forward. This idea that maybe there's a way to separate concerns, separate some development. In other packages that were mentioned, you might have seen this use of square brackets when you pip install something, and you can sort of install sort of components of stuff. So maybe Django could be separated and have a Django square brackets admin, or as you were saying, ORM. So
will never happen. I'd love to see it happen, but it'll never happen. He made it very, very clear that he was not suggesting that. he was worried about the politics behind whether or not.
You don't want to start fights here on the floor. The idea, though, is that maybe there could be a separation of concerns, and that might help as far as development to move things in parallel and not have as many bottlenecks. There was also discussion about third-party libraries, which the idea of promoting them within the project seems like something that they're looking at and figuring out what to do with it. So that's interesting. And then there's a question there then, who's going to maintain that and so forth, as far as not only like maintaining the list, but like paying attention to, are these things updated and maintained themselves? So I attended a workshop yesterday by Chris Adams. It was about Marimo. He mentioned in the title, Marimo and Jupyter sharing the joys of the Django ORM with Python notebooks. Very little talk about Jupyter, actually, much more talk about Marimo. I'm a fan. If you haven't listened to episode 230 with Akshay Agrawal, we talk really, really detailed about Marimo. If you are a Python fan, it is the notebook I think you should choose. Why? Because it's just a Python file, which is really great. It's just a .py. There's no JSON kind of backend sort of stuff. It's really neat. It's super reactive. There's lots of thought that went into the idea. So you don't have the issue of state. If you've ever talked about notebooks before, the idea that you can run one cell or run it out of order and so forth. This system checks to make sure it's all running in order. And that means that you can do really powerful stuff, not only as far as working with it, but like creating dashboards. And he gave some examples of using that, which I really liked. And I was impressed because I hadn't seen it running with Django. And so that was kind of neat. He actually showed kind of creating a small library that then would unlock you to kind of be able to do console and sort of set up stuff directly. And he just did one little import from a small library that would be nearby. So I liked it. I think it'll be really interesting to see how that kind of develops. So there was another sort of steering console talk by Emma. Kind of went pretty far into depths. If you aren't familiar with that, that would be the Django enhancement proposals. And they're looking at how to improve and simplify that process. Part of that involves, I guess, Markdown. Again, that idea of separation of concerns, the idea of maybe having code owner groups. I wasn't clear on this, but the idea that Django has not been using GitHub as much, or maybe portions of it, and kind of moving there. And this is something that's a new approach, and they're testing that. They would like you to come and test new features, and kind of a reminder of celebrating 20 years of Django. Yeah, that's mostly what I have. I have a couple notes on some other talks that are kind of related to my project this week. So this week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. It's one that I mentioned briefly at the end of the show as one of the insightful Django resources available at Real Python. When you start building any new Django web application, there's the fundamental setup you need to tackle first. And this course is titled, How Do You Set Up a Django Project? And it's based on an article by former guest and Real Python team member, Martin Broyce. In the video course, Martin takes you through setting up a virtual environment, installing Django, pinning your project dependencies, setting up the Django project, and starting a Django app. A tour through the entire directory structure that's built when you create a project, and techniques to manage a slimmer structure for your Django project. I think it's a worthwhile investment of your time to learn the fundamental steps to properly set up a Django project and get a solid understanding of the structure of a Django application. Like most of the video courses on Real Python, this course is broken into easily consumable sections. Plus, you get additional resources and code examples for the techniques shown. All Real Python courses have a transcript, including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the search tool on realpython.com. What were the things that you wanted to comment on?
So there were 3 talks that I wanted to highlight. All of them were connected to the intricacies of the database parts of Django. The first was by Adam Johnson, titled Data-Oriented Django Drei. That's Drei as in 1, 2, 3. And for the German speakers in the room, I apologize for my accent. That's 3 in German. This is part of a series of talks Adam has been giving. One of Django's powers is the ORM. For certain kinds of projects, you can get away with never thinking about SQL. After all, that's kind of what the ORM is there for. But for other kinds of projects, understanding what is happening underneath the covers starts to become more and more important. In his talk, Adam spoke about database indexes and how they're necessary for performance. He gave an overview of indexes, how they work, what B trees are. Then with the theory out of the way, he went on to talk about how to take advantage of indexes in Django. One of the things I learned from this was the idea of a partial index, which is an index on a subset of a data in the column. This can be particularly helpful if you want to ignore certain values like nulls. Adam went on to talk about how to choose an index, when to do it, what to index, and highlighted a tool called pgmustard that gathers information about your queries in a Postgres database and makes suggestions on how to improve their performance, usually by adding indexes. The next talk I want to highlight is by Haki Benita. It was called How to Get Foreign Keys Horribly Wrong in Django. Haki is a real Python contributor and a DBA at heart. His talk highlighted situations where you might want to muck with the SQL that Django is doing on your behalf. By default, all foreign keys in Django set an index, so this dovetails nicely with what Adam was talking about. There are situations where these indexes aren't necessary, so he talked about how you might want to get rid of them and what steps you need to do in order to make that happen. These kinds of operations aren't for the faint of heart, but at scale, they can make a big difference. One example, he highlighted reduce the size of an index by a factor of 5, so it can make a big difference. My favorite part of this talk was actually during the Q&A. One of the points he kept driving home was at scale, you should be doing a code review on the migration scripts that Django generates for you. This is to ensure that the generated SQL is making the right choices for your situation. To help make sure this review happens on his team, he's added a GitHub action that detects these kinds of changes and then copies the resulting SQL into the pull request for review. So this is an idea I really like, and I will be stealing and trying to apply it to some of my clients. So that was kind of cool. And then the last talk I wanted to mention is Tim Bell's. It was called Turn Back Time, Converting Integer Fields to bigint Using Django Migrations at Scale. Tim works for a company that has some pretty large databases, and they've run into the situation where 32-bit integers were no longer enough. He ran through what it took to migrate to 64-bit integers and then doubled down on doing it again for his primary and foreign keys. At scale, these kinds of things can be very tricky, and at Tim's company, the migrations took weeks. All 3 talks touched on sort of similar things with indexes and knowing what Django is doing in the ORM at scale. I think the 3 of them should get together and do like a little traveling show. I think it would help a lot of people.
I agree. That'd be good. If you want to learn a little more about pgmustard, I had a long talk with Craig from Postgres, and that was a good conversation, and he offered a whole bunch of sort of database type tools. I know Django, many users are Postgres fans. So, all right, that takes us to projects. So one of the last talks that I saw was Will Vincent's, and he was talking about, it's so hard to deploy things. And I've had Eric Mathis on the show twice, once for his book, and a second time talking about testing and maybe not starting with unit tests, which was a fun conversation. But he has been working very diligently in the Django community on something called django-simple-deploy. I was surprised it wasn't mentioned. It's a great tool. Shout out to the Talk Python podcast. He actually was on there for their 500th episode, talking in detail about it. So if you'd like to learn a little more about it, the idea is a quick way to get things out to something like platform.sh or Heroku or fly.io. Again, using the square brackets as far as installing stuff, it really speeds up the process. The documentation's really good. Eric is always looking for contributors. He's looking for plugins for other platforms. So if you're interested in contributing to a project like that, I know that he's going to be talking about it at PyCon US. So that's another place that you might check out some more information about it. But it is a really great tool, and I think it might answer a lot of the questions as far as the deployment issue, as far as getting things out there. Because I know it's a whole other world. I mean, it's like, okay, wait, I have to be DevOps now. And that sort of stuff is always kind of the issue that we look at as, okay, wait, I want to be a web developer and a data scientist, and now I want to do DevOps. So,
and it changes. So the brutal part of it is you can find some tutorial on the web and you just can't follow it because it's 6 months out of date.
Yeah. What you got for a project?
My project is by Stefano Apostolico, and it's called Django Extra-Buttons. We're at a Django conference, so I'm pretty sure our live audience has at least some passing familiarity with the admin. For the podcast listeners, in case you haven't used it, Django comes with a web microsite for managing any of the models you create for your database. It allows you to perform all the usual create, read, update, and delete operations. CRUD is my favorite acronym in programming, and gives forms for all your objects with very little extra code. What it doesn't do is give you the ability to just stick your own view in there, though. And of course, you can link to your views, but sometimes it would be nice to just have that stuff in the admin page. And that's essentially what this library does. It gives you some decorators that add control to your admin pages. You use the decorators on methods in your admin class, and those become controls on the page that list your objects. There are 4 decorators provided by the library: button, link, view, and choice. Buttons, like you might guess, add a button to the admin. Yeah, I know. Sometimes names help. And the corresponding decorated method then essentially it becomes the view for that button. So say if you want to kick off a job, you could do that through this button and then say use the messages framework to register the response in the admin without ever leaving the admin page. The link decorator adds a link to the page, kind of like button, but without the need for view code. You would use this to link to external sites or your own views somewhere else. You still need a method in the admin class, but it can be pass. It can be basically empty. The view decorator allows you to add a view to the system, but doesn't put any buttons on the screen. This gets used in combination with the last decorator, which is choice. Choice puts a drop-down menu on the admin, with each item in the menu being one of those previously mentioned view decorated methods. I always find there's a line between, is the admin good enough, and oh crap, now I have to build a whole thing that kind of duplicates half of what's in the admin. And I find what this library does is it kind of moves that line a little bit, giving you a little more breathing room with the admin before you have to go crazy and start to have to build things from scratch. I've used it a bunch of times. It's always done the job, and it's definitely one of those I think you should know about if you're building Django admins, because it can help you out a lot.
All right.
Okay.
We are going to do a bit of an Ask Us Anything session here. Chris is bravely going to walk around with a microphone. So
I promise not to tangle and trip you. Let's see how this goes.
Yeah, instead of the wireless mic, we decided to go this route. We were going to do some crazy thing of like trying to hear it through the speakers, but sorry, audio quality.
And again, just as a reminder, if you don't want to be on the podcast, please preface your question with that and we'll edit you out. So, questions. Only have so much cable, so front row's fine.
Hey, thanks very much. And I put my hand up earlier because I heard about this conference on your podcast, and then
that's great.
You guys said you were coming, and I thought, well, I could go as well. So I think it was only about 3 weeks ago or so, something like this. You talked about the time that goes into making video sessions. What about the time that goes into making the podcast? How do you keep up with all the news and find packages and such like this?
So if you're a regular listener, which I'm guessing a lot of people in the room are, I kind of do 2 different forms. One is an interview type show. And I had actually a long talk with Mia earlier about the process of sort of like, do you send questions to people in advance? That might be the first thing, is reaching out and saying, hey, do you want to come on the show? I'm always looking for guests. Conferences are fantastic if you do a podcast yourself in the future as advice, because the person has thought about a topic and has written a bunch of stuff about it and maybe didn't have enough time to really elaborate on it. And so they might want to talk a little bit further about it. So finding guests is a portion of the time. I don't know what that is. It kind of is variable. And often there are total dry spells. And then there's also massive rainstorms of like people. So the other portion of it is, for us, the other type of show that we do is this sort of news show. Chris actually has another job that he didn't really mention, but he does the PyCoders newsletter. And that's why we call it sort of the PyCoders episodes. And that one is gathering all the articles. I don't know if you want to talk about like how long that takes you to gather stuff and put them together.
Yeah, it's an hour or 2 a week. I've got, a whole bunch of preset searches, and a lot of it is, this was stuff I was going to read anyways. It's become a little harder lately because I am adamant that I am not going to post anything that was auto-generated, or it has to be so good that I don't know the difference. We got burned once. I got through an article. The last quarter of it was a hallucination, and I had not read down that far. And we posted it and then got the feedback that library doesn't exist. And
yeah, it was literally referencing something that wasn't there.
so I've become very, very careful about it. So, but yeah, it's about an hour to a week. And then the weeks that we record together, we sit down for... It could be 15 minutes. It tends to turn into 45 because of other things, but that has nothing to do with the job.
Yeah,
we both semi-script for the show. He tends to go sort of bullet point as you were watching here.
You might have noticed, yeah. I'm very nervous, as you probably can tell.
I'm full teleprompter. So there's some prep time in that. So those are every other week. I'd say, it's about an hour and a half kind of thing. And like with the podcast guests, it varies from week to week. So there's weeks where I'm like, oh, I can save that. And here's 6 new links that I can use over the next 3 weeks. And some weeks it's like, oh my God, I can't find anything.
We definitely got to bank stuff, that whole,
The telltale is if you're reading PyCoders and you're noticing that there's a lot of non-Python sort of general dev content, that means there wasn't a lot of Python that week. It's because that's what I tend to backfill with, is like just sort of generic programming stuff.
Real quick question for you. Are you guys interested in, we have those discussions that are more about development in general, or lately we've talked about testing, or lately we talked about management. Are those discussions of interest? You guys into those things? Okay. It's interesting to us, and I get a chance usually to interview Chris because he has way more background in working in those kinds of organizations. Again, I have this kind of wild background and so forth. And I was having a conversation. I wish I was doing more programming lately. I'm learning all these techniques and tools, but I do stay very busy with the other job. So kind of going back to we meet on a Friday to record, and then I usually take about 4 to 5 hours to edit it. I do processing, again, using the tools that were mentioned before from Isotope. I use another tool on my iPad that's called Ferrite. It's the best tool for editing podcasts in the world. You just edit with your fingers. It's super fast. If you're going to do what I do, which is get rid of ums and uhs, I try to make my guests sound as professional as possible. If somebody's struggling in a podcast, I want to make sure that they sound their best and sound as good as I possibly can. And I hope that shows in the production values that I put for the show. So from there, I then build show notes, and I'm looking at transcripts. Unfortunately, that's a back-end thing that I have to work with Dan a little bit about to try to figure out how we're going to do it. Create a YouTube sort of version. We use a platform to record that's called Zencastr. It's one of the more popular tools that's out there for this. I think a lot of people are use that and another one, but it will record video also. So I have been recording video, and I don't know if you've been on our YouTube channel, but we've been doing clips. That's like our little promotion thing. So I'm a little bit involved in that too, to try to see if we can help kind of continue to grow the audience, or at least keep the audience where we're at. So I don't know if that answered most of your questions. So it's a mix, and the hours kind of vary depending on how intense. Like I had 5 guests recently, and so that episode was a lot of work as far as like editing it and kind of getting it together and so forth. But that's unusual. And also, I have a weird tendency that if I have a guest who is very nervous, like I am right now, I have this empathetic thing. So I'll start talking like them, and I'll do more ums and uhs also, which I don't like, but that's something that I've always done as a human being. And so, that's something I have to kind of get used to. And so, hopefully the people, if I'm being more confident with them, it comes across. And thanks for the question.
Other questions? I don't have that much cable. Well, maybe I do.
Thank you. So sorry, bit of a change of topic. So firstly, I want to say I love Real Python, by the way. I recommend it to all of my students. I tell them, sign up for it. It's completely worth it. And I love that you guys have office hours, and it's amazing, the community.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So I guess my question is kind of 2 parts. Firstly, I noticed that you guys have learning paths, and I was kind of wondering how you decide what learning paths to create, if you have any exciting stuff coming up as far as that goes. And also as an educator, I like to find out from other educators, how has Python education changed for you in your mind with tools like ChatGPT and all this stuff I see a lot of my students using with mixed results? And I was just wondering what your take is on all of that.
So I did have a conversation right about the beginning of the year with Martin and I think Stephen Grappetta and Martin. We talked about sort of the changes at RealPython. That episode, I don't have the number on top of my head, but we did talk a little bit about learning paths and trying to make them more structured because we have contributors. And so often we're at the whim of, well, this is what I would like to write about. And so okay, well, how do we structure it and kind of organize it? And between Martin and Stephen, that's something we're working on and trying to structure the education a little bit more. It is not in my purview as much. I think if I were to comment on it, I'd probably get asked to start doing that too. So I'm trying to avoid adding another hat to what I do.
A lot of so there are some full-time writers for RealPython, but the vast majority of folks are freelance, and it's an article at a time. And so just the day-to-day life gets in the way. So we tend to try to avoid things like multi-part articles, because what'll happen is you'll get part 1 and then you'll never get part 2. And so, and then everybody's like, well, when do we get the rest of it? And then we're having to find some other author to do it. And I know I picked up a couple part 2 Django articles and it's the ego of being a programmer. You look at it and go, well, this isn't wrong. And now, this isn't right. Now I want to fix part 1 as well. I'm like, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. And so it just makes it messy. So the learning path stuff tends to almost always be retrospective, right? We find stuff that gets grouped together and put it that way. So there is some planning around it, but it's loose.
It's getting better. We are thinking about it. Yeah, definitely. And Stephen Grappetta, because he's been making these courses for us, these workshops, has been combing through it all also and looking at it and saying, actually, isn't something we talked about, but we're doing a lot of edits now to our courses, like, okay, well, this needs to be fixed or edited or updated and so forth. And it's definitely something. And then as far as the tools thing, we are looking at those tools ourselves. We are exploring code spaces. I keep trying to push the Marimo thing out there as a tool that because you can embed those in a web page, which I think is fantastic. Don't have to worry about having a bunch of other servers and other things set up, which is really cool. I don't know if I'll win out on that, but it's evolving. I think that conversation probably would be pretty good on there. And yeah, let me know if you have other questions later. We're open to asking, especially if you want to open up something on our Slack and so forth.
And at risk of being completely controversial, to your question about the ChatGPT stuff, as an instructor, I've had not a single good experience with it. I keep running into students who don't, it just hasn't gone into their head, right? And a
bit of the learning, no longer understanding your phone numbers kind of.
Yeah,
at a micro scale.
So I like the idea of having essentially tab complete on steroids, but because that then you don't have to look the API up. That kind of stuff makes sense. But the generative things, I'm sorry, yeah, boilerplate sucks, but go write some, because then maybe you'll learn how to code. And now I'm going to get death threats, but yeah, that's yeah.
We might have self-selected out of that already.
I'm also old, right? So my programming platform is Vim, so that tells you something as well. So that could just be an angry old man shouting at cloud. So keep that in mind.
Hi. Kind of related to the last question, but a quick look on the website and I see that your kind of specialist stuff like learning pandas or data science or web development all kind of comes after the core learn Python, learn coding. A lot of people get started with, I'm learning Django or I'm learning pandas. I actually started on learn pandas for data science and went from there. So it's kind of reading into how you've structured that. What's your opinions on people getting started with a framework?
So, there's always a bit of a dependency problem, right? You have to be this tall to ride the ride. So I find particularly when I teach in person, when I do a, for data scientists course, if I have to figure out how to teach what an iterator is, then we have a problem. So There are things you can do to try and help kind of modify that and kind of get it in the right direction, but there really does need to be some basic ideas. I don't know whether I'm successful at it, but what I try to do is if you're aiming at like an intro course for a particular demographic, for want of a better word, then you try to set the toy problems that they're going to play with to be in their world. That way, it at least gives them something that they glom onto. And so, like if it's a web course, then let's talk some web stuff. If it's a data science course, then let's talk some data science stuff, because it causes them to engage more. But it's hard, right? So I just finished doing a Polars course, and we basically just said, screw it. If you don't know these things, go take that course first. And sometimes you kind of have to do that, right?
We do a lot of the prerequisite type of thing and suggestions. If you get to this point and you're like, again, like you need to be at least prepped to this type of thing. We've been fairly proactive about it on my side of the house in the video courses of trying to add, like, you should check out this course, you should check out this thing. We've added a new feature to the site, which is glossary stuff. I don't know how much that will help you as far as navigating and learning the terms, but then maybe connecting to stuff. It's so much vocabulary, but yeah, I agree that that's a big part of it. Of like, when I got into Python, one of the reasons I really wanted to do a podcast is because I was listening to like Talk Python, and at the time they were not doing as much with like breaking acronyms down and things like that. And so that's something I've tried to do. I've sometimes, kind of swing one way or the other with it, but just even doing the immersion thing of just like swimming in the language was something that was interesting to me. And maybe that's something that's your experience too with listening to podcasts. At least kind of hearing like what's happening and what's around me, and then I've heard about that thing and I can learn a little more about it. But it is an active thing that we think about and think about prerequisites, and then how much. Your most recent course that was about thread safety, he said if you don't know about the fundamentals about threads, we're not going to spend the video course portion discussing all this stuff again. We're going to kind of jump ahead, but then there were links to the other information. So,
it's where video becomes a less useful medium, because on the web, you can always go, it's hyperlink anything. And then, if you don't understand that term, I can click on the hyperlink. And like with the threads example, we basically said, look, this is not an intro to threads course. This is about semaphores and locks. And if you haven't done threads before, this is not the place to start. But then the second lesson was still, this is a simple threading program. This is a race condition. And so if you needed a refresher, you weren't coming at it cold. And somebody who maybe hadn't done threading before, there might have been enough information for them to go. So we do try to balance it. Once in a while, I find we'll also do with the courses where we'll sort of say, I've done the lesson 2 and lesson 3 are going to cover these topics because you need them. There's a chance you know them already. This is what I'm going to say. If that bores you, head for lesson 4, right? Yeah. So
that's
you
the
try
balancing
to
act.
Kind of balance it, right?
Yeah, I always worry that are we giving people a chance to be able to move ahead? That's partly why we do the sort of bite-sized type of lesson thing too, is also to be able to have the ability to repeat. One of the things that I try to harp on is this idea of searchability on the site. And I have to tell my instructors to do this. It may seem annoying to you if you're a video course watcher to say, you just learned about this. And this lesson, you're going to learn about this. Partly why? Because you can go to our search engine and type in a term and get a video lesson, which is part of a course. And you may not know where the hell you are in the course and where it is in context. And so that's something I've tried to do contextually to make sure that people understand, like, okay, I don't know what that other thing was. I should go back a lesson before that before I get into this. So that's kind of one of these things that if you break things apart, you still have that other problem compared to like a huge, massive chunk.
And like, it's no difference in like even a conference here, right? Like, so we've had speakers who I'm in charge of, a small department and I'm doing this and, I've got whatever it is, 30 users. And not that there's not, there was interesting stuff in that talk, and it's bookended by, what was it, 100 million transactions every 4 seconds? I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you see it even here, right? And so I'm sure in that audience, there's 300 odd people here. Half of them were going to be, okay, that taught me nothing. And the other half of them are going to be, oh my God, what was that? What, so like you're all over the shop, right? And because Django in particular is kind of all encompassing, right? I am not a database guy. I know enough to know that I have to hire a DBA. And so like I can get by with the ORM, I can touch things, but as soon as you start talking about, how we're going to optimize the queries and all that kind of stuff, I know I shouldn't touch it. And so I found all that stuff fascinating, but like, I'm never going to do it. Like, I'm never going to do it, right? Like, I know to go and hire an expert, right? So you always get this range, even within the web space, and that's without getting into data science and everything else, right?
One other quick note, some of the stuff that Will was talking about, this idea of having these sort of starting tutorial things, that is something that we're really good at. If you're wanting to send somebody who's interested in Django to our site, we actually have a really good course about one of the things he talked about, the structure of a Django project. What are all these folders? What are these kinds of things? Martin did a really fantastic job on that course. And he also did a course that is one of the more popular, like instead of using the poll app, it's actually, creating a portfolio app. And it's very, it's nicely paced. and so if you're interested in that, or you want to share that with somebody else who's more of a Django beginner, we have quite a few resources. And then we have, as was mentioned, some more advanced stuff like migrating things and stuff like that. So, well, thanks so much. And thanks again for coming on the show, Chris.
Yes. Next one I don't have to fly to. That'll be
exactly.
Okay, we good?
Yeah.
All right.
And a thank you to AMD. Developers are relentless explorers, driven to solve problems and redefine what's possible. AMD believes in open possibilities, the possibility to embrace freedom, follow your curiosity, and create something amazing. Together with AMD, the only limit on innovation is your imagination. Experience open and advanced software from AMD. Follow AI at AMD on X to get the latest Developer Central resources. I want to thank everybody in the audience from our live recording this week. And I want to thank the organizers of DjangoCon Europe 2025. Thanks for having us. And I want to thank Christopher Trudeau for convincing me to come to Dublin, Ireland and hang out with him at DjangoCon EU 2025. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and I look forward to talking to you soon.